In MRG's research on the compassionate leader, we showed that 9 behaviors out of the 22 we measure in our LEA leadership assessment are different in compassionate leaders than they are in less compassionate leaders. So, of the 9, 5 of those compassionate leaders use more frequently, behaviors that they are in play more frequently than the less compassionate leaders. And 4 behaviors the compassionate leaders are using less frequently. This is the case in much of MRG's research when we look at different ways of describing effectiveness. The effective leaders have a balance of how they're using behaviors that are different than those who are seen as less effective. So, for the compassionate leader research, we see the 5 behaviors that are used more frequently. Oftentimes, coaches feel intuitively, oh, well, that makes sense. But when we look at the behaviors that compassionate leaders are using less frequently, of the 4 behaviors, 3 of the behaviors sometimes create a question. So the 4 behaviors that compassionate leaders use less frequently than less compassionate leaders are the behavior we call dominant, which is being very assertive and forceful in the leadership role. And not surprisingly, people usually aren't surprised that that behavior is in play less when a leader is operating as a compassionate leader. But the other 3 are the ones that create a question. The first behavior that creates a question is self, and that's the behavior that is measuring the degree to which the leader is acting independently, operating independently, thinking and problem solving on their own. The second behavior is feedback, and feedback as we measure it is the degree to which a leader is being very straightforward and direct in letting people know where they stand. And then finally, the last behavior that sometimes creates a question is the behavior of production. And in our model, production is measuring the degree to which a leader is really pushing for stretch results, really asking people to work hard and to raise the bar and to focus on the end result. So, one of the things I want to clarify is when we are saying a highly effective leader, in this case, a highly effective compassionate leader, it is doing something more or less, it is degree of. So using it in degree of frequency more or degree of frequency less. So that doesn't mean that if they're doing it more, they're doing it all the time. And if they're doing it less, they're not doing it. Somehow I think what happens in this effectiveness space is the leaders who are highly effective, again, in this case, highly effective compassionate leaders, have right-sized their approach in these behaviors. And so I'll go through each of the 3 so that have oftentimes questions associated with them so people can get a better picture. And understand that in the less effective leaders, in this case, the less compassionate leaders, they are over relying on these behaviors to reach the outcomes that they're trying to achieve in the context they're trying to achieve them. So the first, self, compassionate leaders, yes, are still taking time to work independently and to think independently. The difference in the compassionate versus less compassionate is the compassionate leaders are balancing how much they're on their own, both in their thinking and acting, with how much they bring others along with them and how much they involve others in the work. So it's a balance of independence and inclusive connection with others. Feedback. We always think of how great feedback is and people aren't getting enough feedback, but it is possible to overuse feedback in several ways. One, the overuse of feedback is part of a micromanagement strategy, right? I tell you exactly how to do it. I track you in detail to make sure you're doing it, and I keep telling you what I think of how you're doing it. And so if you're trying to empower people and give people space to own things, that over feedback mechanism creates that sense of over control and micromanagement. The other thing that can happen with feedback is that people can overuse feedback relative to the amount of time they take to explain people what the expectation is. So sometimes over feedback means I haven't spent the time to tell you what my expectations are, but I'm quick to tell you when you don't meet those unspoken expectations. So that's another way of overusing. The other times that we can see people overusing is less about overuse and more about not choosing the right time to give feedback and or not delivering feedback in a way that people can take in. right? So again, with the compassionate leader, they are choosing the right time and the right way to give feedback and making sure they're not overusing feedback as a tool to help people accomplish things. And then finally, production, I think, probably is one of the most interesting ones in this study because the study shows that the compassionate leaders are more effective across every competency that we measure. And for many of them, by a significant magnitude from their less compassionate counterparts. And in fact, compassionate leaders are rated higher in delivering results. So it's interesting because production is the behavior of pushing and driving for results, and yet the outcome measure of delivering results is higher for them. So again, I think it's right sizing the application of the behavior and being sure you're not overusing the behavior and balancing it so that people feel aligned with why we're stretching and when we're stretching, and including people in the process of stretching. And so you have an integrated approach to delivering results. Just as an aside, we have research that shows the behavior combination of leaders who are very effective at that delivering results. And of course, not surprising, production is a behavior that influences it, but it's not even the strongest behavior in that behavior composition. Actually, in case you're interested, the strongest behavior is the behavior we call control, which is actually controlling process. So tracking, monitoring, staying on top of things to ensure that things get completed on time and that roadblocks are eliminated. So again, when we say in the compassionate leadership space that the compassionate leaders exhibit these four behaviors, dominant, self, feedback, and production, less frequently than their less compassionate counterparts, you can think of it as they're holding these behaviors at an ideal level of frequency where their less compassionate counterparts are over relying on the behaviors to achieve their outcome to a less effective outcome. I hope that's helpful and makes sense. Thanks.